I feel like when trauma happens, what happens is a person's perception is damaged in that they're unable to perceive the world without fear. And if people get medicated, they're punished and locked up for being traumatized, so they're traumatized again. I feel like in spiritual emergence, there's something else guiding and directing behavior. It's probably love. Came across this Einstein article letter thing, and he was saying how E equals mc squared is actually supposed to be E equals love times c squared. And neurotribes, people with similar brains have to stick together, and I feel like this bipolar brain thing is an emergent neurotribe, because the growth of the brain is dependent on being relational and communicating with each other. So it's important to start communicating in these ways in order for that relational neurotribe to actually develop. Otherwise, it remains in isolated human brains. Maybe that's the thing, the whole medicating people into a band-aided ego state is to keep them separate and actually believing themselves to be a part of a mental illness neurotribe, a tribe of defective people. Because these new communication and new information circuits need to grow. If we don't talk about them, they're going to atrophy. And the brain is not an independent entity. It doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in relationship to all that is around it in its environment. It's actually a mirror of the environment. But what is it that the brain could mirror outward into the environment if we started being relational in these ways and talking about these processes in other ways besides being defective and saying that one should isolate? I think in map consciousness, our brains become like puzzle pieces, and we actually need each other. We need to communicate with each other in these ways. And I actually think that's part of map consciousness. In ego consciousness, we actually have these separate brains. But for map consciousness to really take hold and to hold us, we must be together. We must be us. Because otherwise, a certain brain grows into the map conscious state, and then ego-centered brains come in and just stomp on it. But if there were more people relating in this way, then individual brains couldn't be stomped on and said, you're defective, take these pills and keep to yourself. I want us to have our brains back, but we need to be together. Because I feel like when we go into map consciousness, the reasons why so many of us have very similar perceptions and experiences, because it's that oneness, it's that one consciousness, it's a fundamental part of us. It's our fundamental nature. We become so distracted that that part of our nature has become foreign to us. If there's an experience in consciousness that the ego can't measure, the brain needs to create new categories for it. And as categories are created and healed, it becomes a game. I feel like thought is an accumulation. So when one goes into mania, one goes above the world of thoughts into new thoughts. But then when one comes back down into regular consciousness, one has to again face the accumulation of personal and collective thoughts, which is the past. So really in mania, we're trying to decouple from our past, from our history. And when we're decoupled from that, we can be anything we want. How does consciousness travel through the human nervous system? The spark of the heart probably comes from consciousness, and it's electricity, so consciousness in a way could be some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. Likely light. Consciousness is made out of light. All the properties of physics are actually the properties of consciousness. Even gravity. And of the human nervous system. And they come from the human nervous system in terms of ideas, thoughts, and inventions. And in terms of Dr. David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, I'm wondering if that level of consciousness is sort of what is sparking the heart. And the beat of the heart is the magnetism. So the heart is like the magnet, and the spark is the light. And that light, that level of consciousness is sort of what makes the heart beat, and then that's how one feels, is that state of consciousness. And it's like all those states of consciousness are ever present, but it's just a matter of what is playing through us, almost like a musical flow. It's like we are the music of consciousness. We are the instruments of consciousness. We are the animations of consciousness. And we mostly live in the past and the future. And then that stress would change our heartbeat because we're actually not perceiving here and now. We're living in images. And those images are the level of consciousness that we're at. And it's almost like when we get too stressed, those images that play in our consciousness by consciousness actually can be further away from the center of who we are, and then they can feel like hallucinations or delusions because they're outside that sphere of the personal. And those hallucinations and delusions are confusing. But even normal thinking is confusing because it's confusing our body apparatus, thinking that we're somewhere that we're not. And if that happens, then naturally there would be some kind of fear response. Because we're never quite in our body. So our body's actually the thing that's afraid. So those are all projections. They're all holographic projections. So it's like we're holographic projectors. We're projectors of the hologram, but we project our own holograms within the hologram. So we're not acting in accordance with the actual hologram. And that's why we feel we're separate egos, because we have these projections away from, we're not one with the actual hologram. We don't see ourselves as the same as everything else. It's just one hologram. We see ourselves as separate because we have these separate projections. And just as hallucinations and delusions would be very scary, even being out of alignment with the hologram slightly would be scary too for the body. Hallucinations and delusions are just stronger thoughts and stronger images than the ones that we normally play on our mind screen. I feel we have to have a clear mind screen to actually be in alignment with the hologram, the actual hologram, instead of creating our own holograms within the hologram. actual hologram would probably be love. So if energy equals mass times c, the speed of light squared, and Einstein is saying that mass, or m, is actually love, then mass, appearance, is love made manifest. Because we can't see the speed of light. I feel like when we move our consciousness away from the body, that's when we act in habit. If we actually are learning something new, we have to be conscious, we have to be present, we have to be doing it actually. But then we make things into habits so we can move our consciousness somewhere else, into some kind of daydream or imagination. But the more we do that, it sort of shows that we're not actually where we would want to be. And if our consciousness goes somewhere else and we're on autopilot, we have less power. There's more limitation. We can't change so much what we're doing, so we're acting like machines. And so when we're in the field of thought, in the field of habitual thinking, we're in habit and we're not really conscious and present. We're not being attentive. And so most things are within the field of thought, and we're sort of going along on habit tracks of thought. Words are actually in our nervous system as electricity, and I feel like our words in our nervous system actually distort the signals being sent. So there could be signals being sent that are trying to tell us something in the body, but since we're talking in our head, we can't actually sense those signals in our body. Those signals in our body could be subtle and actually give voice to something in our body and kind of tell us, oh, something's happening that I need to listen to. But we don't generally do that because we're listening to our own voice about past abstractions and things, so we're not actually listening to our body. And that could be something that happens in mania, is that the nervous system sort of becomes immune to one's old thoughts and words. And all of a sudden new words are arising from the nervous system, from perception. And we might say things and see things and experience things totally differently, and we're speaking. We talk a lot sometimes because we're giving voice to something the universe wants us to perceive. And it could almost be as simple as that the universe wants us to have a voice other than the one that we're used to and habituated to. Maybe it doesn't really matter what the particular content is. It could be just that we are perceiving and creating some kind of content and context with our own voice, as opposed to just being recorders of things. That would be like a flower, like a dandelion, looking at a tulip and asking, how am I supposed to grow? Like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to think? How am I supposed to look? And it's asking and looking for things in the wrong places. Because if we're clear, we can actually hear our own voice, not have other things from other people recorded in our voice and sort of mask our own voice. And that's part of what could actually mask our own voice, is that we record things and then we repeat them to ourselves in our own voice. So then we can't hear our own voice from within. Our neurons are polluted with our own voice, with other people's ideas and thoughts. I think it has something to do with an increase in entropy in the nervous system. I believe increase in entropy is more chaos and release of information, and it's sort of like all that happens and then we give voice to all this stuff, or we write all this stuff down, or we're all creative, and it's perhaps because we don't know how to allow or get out of the way of this entropy process from happening naturally. I feel actually that it could be balanced and happening all the time if we were really one with the moment, but oftentimes it gets blocked and stored up, and then when we do go into mania or manic consciousness, it's like this big chaos because it's something that has been suppressed through our own need to have consistency for such a long time. And then when it's released and we go into that mania, we're like, wow, this feels so good to be inconsistent. And the very thing that we've been moving away from or trying to suppress our whole life, inconsistency, we realize that's what freedom is. And then a lot of people, when they come out of that state, they're like, that's what they want. People want that mania. When maybe we just need to be more consistently inconsistent. The universe wants to give voice to its entropy through us. We are just decreasing the universal entropy with our categories. We have so few categories: good, bad, right, wrong, mentally ill, normal, and then we decrease the entropy. We decrease all the entropy of the richness of extreme states of consciousness into mental illnesses. It seems like consciousness is undergoing an entropic process. I feel like our narrowing categories in consciousness actually create a reaction in consciousness to increase the entropy in consciousness that some people experience as mania, extreme states, map consciousness. I think part of map consciousness is the universe putting us back into alignment. It's almost like the universe is a chiropractor, like a Gaiac chiropractor, or an enviropractor. It's trying to put us back into alignment with the environment. There's the alignment of the spine in the field of gravity through, say, rolfing, and there's the alignment of the cells and exercising them within the field of gravity through rebounding. Well, the universe can put us into spontaneous realignment with the universe, with consciousness, through map consciousness and trans consciousness. Just like our body can get out of alignment with the field of gravity, so can our consciousness. And it could be the collective of the totality of the consciousness of humanity is out of alignment. So a certain number of people are going to be put back into alignment with the universe as a necessary part of the process. And we naturally go back into alignment with the field of consciousness at the time of death, physical death, but the universe isn't waiting for people to die. It's having to realign them during their lifetime, and maybe several times. And stress distorts the body. It shows that we're not living in alignment with nature and human nature. And so the universe, through the chiropractic process, puts us back into alignment, and it can be pretty jarring. I feel there's a field of gravity and a field of consciousness, and our body needs to be in alignment with gravity, and we also need to be in alignment with consciousness. What brings us out of alignment are adding in things that aren't natural. So the process of realignment is actually subtracting those things that aren't natural, and it can feel like death because something is dying. All those unnatural things that were added in are dying. It's like a metamorphosis in consciousness. Just as a caterpillar can undergo metamorphosis, our consciousness can also undergo metamorphosis. And the caterpillar must be freaking out inside that chrysalis, like, what is happening? I'm dying, I'm being torn to pieces. And then it emerges and it's like, wow, this is cool. I'm more awesome than I was before. I feel like it's a metamorphosis in the brain. The brain is attempting to think another way, to think in a different way, to think in different ways, to turn those circuits of the brain back on. And I think part of it is that we're supposed to be thinking together and cooperating on things, and that's why people in that state of consciousness have similar mindsets, similar ways of thinking. Generally, people are isolated when they're like that, and they're not necessarily with other people doing all these mastermind groups or anything like that. But if we get to the point where we're in that energy and able to collaborate with each other, then it could be pretty powerful. I think part of the process too is it's almost like a wisdom tradition. It's like a wisdom tradition within consciousness, and it's trying to see who it can trust with this wisdom. And the ego comes back online. And the thing is that through the system, most people forget the wisdom. And even if they didn't forget the wisdom, it could be difficult to carry out the wisdom with the ego online. So there's a trust element in this wisdom. And part of me wanting to decouple from what I'm doing is to trust the wisdom in a way, even though I don't feel the wisdom. I have been in close contact with it before, and in normal consciousness it's easy for me to get complacent and just go about my life, and I'm not sure what the highest intention of the wisdom is, but in a way I feel it's to free us from the mind, from the collective of thought. So transcending the system isn't necessarily about transcending the mental health system, it's about transcending thought altogether. And the mental health system is the system that says what you were moving towards, the transcendence trajectory that you were on, is just a mental illness. And I would like to think for myself there is no mental illness, and transcend. Not necessarily transcend mental illness, but transcend thought and the structures of thought. Sort of the stuff that Eckhart Tolle is talking about. And others, of course. And it's about changing the field of consciousness, because that's what reorganizes things. So if I could be optimistic and feel like a bunch of people might listen to the stuff I've said and think for themselves and actually see some of what I've said for themselves, not just smile and nod and think, oh, I can believe that, but actually seeing what I'm saying. If some of it is worth seeing, I don't know, maybe none of it is, and it doesn't matter. But if I think, well, maybe there's some people out there who have a similar context within their heart or even within their mind and have been speaking to themselves in these ways, or wondering, and then that's going to change the field of consciousness if there's a certain number of people that want to relate in this way, and perhaps create a neurotribe of people who feel like this other context, which could be infinite and many people could create together, is a world that one would like to hold within their nervous system. And the thing I think, and I don't know if it's true, is that believing some words that someone said isn't the same as actually following step by step what someone is saying in one's brain, in one's being, and actually seeing what they're saying, not just accumulating facts which may or may not be true. Because when you see something for yourself, it doesn't matter if it's a fact in terms of science, because you've seen it for yourself. And it might be a fact in science, you just haven't read that book or haven't seen that fact or study or whatever. I feel like too, though, when one sees something for oneself, it becomes part of the nervous system, because it's not something one has to actually memorize. It's sort of, it might unfold something. And I would think too that things that are memorized are sort of crystallized in the brain, whereas context would be more fluid. It would be like the brain cells sort of dancing with each other as opposed to locking in and then repeating themselves and hardening and almost forming like scar tissue in the brain. And I feel like seeing something in terms of context would allow for more seeing in that way. It would unfold and open to more and more context as opposed to closing down and seeing less and less because something just sort of collapsed one's visual field by being taken in as a belief. And that's why the stuff that I say, I don't really believe any of it. I'm just saying it. So I think a lot of this self-dialogue could actually change the field of my brain